You're listening to Scaling Up Services, where we speak with entrepreneurs, authors, business experts, and thought leaders to give you the knowledge and insights you need to scale your service-based business faster and easier. And now, here is your host, business coach Bruce Eckfeldt.
Welcome, everyone. This is Scaling Up Services. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. And our guest today is Ron Carucci, and he is managing partner and co-founder at Navalent. He's also author of many books, most recently Rising to Power. And he's written extensively for publications like Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and other leading business magazines and publications. And I'm really excited to have him on today to talk a little bit about leadership, where leadership goes right and where leadership goes wrong, and some of the challenges that leaders face and how we can overcome them. So with that, Ron, welcome to the program.
Hey, Bruce, how are you? Thanks for having me.
So why don't we talk a little bit about your background and how you got into this? I know you've been working with leaders for decades, several decades, but a little bit of your background and how you got into the position of working with leaders on leadership, on management, and effectiveness.
Sure, go ahead. Out me as old. Thanks. Gosh, I began my career in a very different part of the world and in the arts, but changed careers. I had the fortune to realize that I bored easily in my early 20s, so I switched careers to organizational behavior and organizational psychology because I realized that I would never be bored because the story always changes every day.
Yeah.
I think since I was a kid, I always had a natural fascination with human endeavor, organizing it at scale. What would happen when people came together to get something done, whether it was, I was the kid that organized the stickball game in our neighborhood. I was the kid that organized fundraisers or block parties. I just loved the natural phenomenon of what happens when people would cooperate and come together to work. So began my career early inside organizations, but quickly realized that the idea of telling the truth to leaders wasn't always welcomed the way I assumed it would be when it came to getting better. And so I realized that if I was going to express my real passion for organization, it was going to have to be by not being part of one. And so I went external and started my own consulting practice, and then eventually brought that to a larger firm. And 14 years ago, a couple of friends and I decided we could do it on our own. So we began Navalent.
So the focus of Navalent, who do you typically work with and how do you typically help them? What does an engagement look like, and how are you, what kind of sort of facets of leadership and organizational change are you grappling with?
Yeah, so we sort of sit at the intersection of strategy and organization and leadership. So where those three things intersect, where a strategy's been articulated or presumably articulated, but maybe not that well, and you have to organize the assets of the organization around executing that strategy, and leaders have to guide that. It's in that troika where we sit and help senior leaders, business unit presidents, CEOs, division leaders, or sometimes even functional leaders stand that journey up and get it going, or they've gotten themselves into a ditch and we have to tow them out.
Yeah,
that's where we play, and we recognize that it's a very systemic journey. There's no silver bullets. Typically, we may not be the first one in to help. Yeah. We may be following on from others who have tried things that didn't work, or the organization wasn't able to metabolize the solutions. And so we begin all of our journeys of transformation with a really, really thorough MRI of the organization.
Interesting.
And to get a real lay of the land. Every leader, of course, tells us they know what the problem is, which, of course, always leads us to ask curiously, well, then if you know what the problem is, why is it not solved? So typically, we help them say, yes, you probably know what part of the problem is. You probably have a dangerously symptomatic view of some aspects of it that are true, but obviously there are things you're missing or you wouldn't have called. Yeah. So usually we'll go in and get under the hood and with a really systemic look at how all of the organization is operating, all the stories it's telling itself about its performance or its customers or itself, all of the ways leaders are or are not cooperating across the boundaries of the organization, all of the technologies, the processes, or the lack of them. And typically one of the many things we find in the mid-cap world where your listeners hail from is we typically find things very akin to the $100 million company trapped in the body of a $30 million organization.
So describe that in more detail. I think I know what you mean, but give us some details.
They grew, but they didn't scale, right? So it's kind of like the teenage boy wearing his dad's suit, standing there where you can hear the seams of the organization ripping apart, where they've taxed the organization design they have so far beyond its utility that they just, as you can hear crumbling happening at the edges, and leaders don't know what to do because they're so far behind the scaling curve. They've added a lot of top line revenue, but the cost structure has followed behind it, and they bloated themselves because they didn't really think about, they never took the time to stop working in the organization long enough to work on the organization.
Yeah.
And now there is several thousand hamsters on wheels trying to keep things going.
Yeah. It makes total sense. I mean, I think I'm constantly kind of talking with leaders about the lag, about the organizational lag that ends up happening in those cases, particularly in kind of high growth, quick growth situations where you really have to, think about what does the organization look like in 6 to 12 months, and how do we start putting that stuff in place now? Not how do we, get the organization where it should have been 12 months ago today.
Right.
And that getting ahead of that is probably one of the biggest challenges I see for leaders. How much do you kind of think about, or how much are you kind of diagnosing or working with leaders on kind of the organization design versus the leadership, the leader's kind of internal state or mindset, or like, I guess how much of this is, what's going on in the organization versus what's going on inside the leaders themselves?
So that's a fabulous question, Bruce, and I don't distinguish between the two. I actually think both of those things are so interrelated that when you treat them separately, you actually do harm.
Yeah.
If you don't understand that the inner landscape of the leader is a reflection of the external landscape he's leading or she's leading in, and vice versa, you can't treat them as if they're not the same.
Yeah. Are they causal one way or the other, or are they interplay? Is it a dynamic from your point of view?
They're highly causal of each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So if you have a leader who's highly neurotic and second guesses decision making and slow and risk averse, you're going to have a culture that's the same way. If you have a governance design that does not distribute decision rights to the right places, you're going to have a leader who can't make decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got to look at them both as highly interconnected.
Yeah.
Our code language for that, when we think about change, we call it within, between, among. So you've got to diagnose change deep within the leader and their own landscape and their own narratives and how they think about leadership, between leaders and their colleagues, between functions, the classic marketing, sales, supply chain, logistics, finance, and R&D, HR, and everybody between. And then you have to have among. You have to have change systemically in the culture, in the strategic understanding, and the governance processes and the technologies. Yeah. And if you're only doing change on one or two of those, you're going to fail, right? So you've got to have change on all three simultaneously, and you've got to keep them very connected. And so often practitioners with great intentions and good people go in and they major in one, right? So they're the coaches that do the within, the team builders that do the between, or the culture change experts that do the among, and they leave the others to their own demise. And change fails. Yeah.
No, it actually reminds me. So I came out of technology, and I spent a lot of time on software systems, and then coaching software teams, and then onto companies and leadership teams around software solutions. And one of the principles we had, or ideas that kept coming up, was if you want to understand how a piece of software is structured, is you look at the structure of the team, right? That the team, the organizational structure, will be reflected in the actual structure of the processes and procedures and stuff in the code. And I think that's the same true with the organization, is that how the team or how the organization is physically structured ends up becoming, reflected in the processes, the procedures, the way it executes the business. And that could be for good or bad. And oftentimes.
It's a great point. And they don't even realize the bad part of that, right? So an organization design is first and foremost an embodiment of a strategy, right? Yeah. So, I can't tell you how you should be organized until you tell me what you intend to do. And it's so fascinating to me, Bruce, how often I ask leaders in the mid-cap world, tell me about your strategy. And I get all the counterfeits, right? I get the mission statement, the vision statement, the values. I get the product quota. I get the annual operating plan. I get the financial goals. I get the business plan they gave their PE
forecast. I love the forecast one.
Sales forecast. I get Costco call. That's the strategy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's all very interesting, but that doesn't tell me who you are.
Yeah.
Tell me why somebody who does what you do, why a customer would pick you over them. What is it that you do that's special, that's interesting and unique, that sets you apart from those other choices that your customers have? Yeah. And until you can tell me that, you have no strategy. And those are the fundamental building blocks of an organization design. And when they're not, you get your strategy and your organization so far afield that you have leaders stretching between the two to try and keep them connected, which eventually they can't do, right?
Yeah.
So the gravitational pull of a dysfunctional organization almost always wins. And then you've seen this many times too. You go around the table at the senior team level and say, what's our strategy? And you get as many different answers as you have people.
Yeah, no, and that is a classic for discussion. I think many of us in this kind of organizational, performance world, get is, I mean, I'll have cases where we'll have a, 8-person leadership team and we'll get 9 different strategies coming out of that discussion.
And they can't believe it. They think, well, how could, of course, each of them thinks that they're right.
Yeah.
And the others just need to align around them.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I think I would be happy if each one of them thought they were right. I think I'd be happy. It's the ones that I get that they don't even know. They kind of make a stab at it, and they're actually not confident in their answer. That's almost even worse, is that when they realize they don't have a strategy, and then there's a question of, well, what have we been doing for the last 12 months?
We just finished a 15-year longitudinal study with more than 30 leaders on organizational honesty to find out what predicts lying, what predicts people withholding the truth in an organization. Yeah. And one of them was a lack of strategic clarity, that when you lack a sense of shared identity among your organization, you are 3 times more likely to have people withhold or distort the truth. And the line I got from one of my interviewees was, when we don't know who we are, we make things up.
So hold on, let's unpack that a little bit. So in the study, you found that the study was specifically looking at sort of organizational truth-telling, or give me some more details on the study.
So it was a 15-year longitudinal study with 3,300 interviews to understand the factors of, beyond individual character, beyond the individual ethical choices, what are the systemic reasons why people lie or withhold the truth? And one of the questions I ask leaders all the time, we all have MBRs, we all have QBRs, we all have some device in our organization that gathers leaders on some periodic basis to look back at what's happened and to look ahead at what's about to happen. Yeah. And I asked them, how often during your routine organizational inspection process like that, do you find yourself thinking privately during someone else's presentation, this is such bull? But of course, no one ever says anything. Yeah. And we all do. We all sit and listen to the sales guys or the R&D guys or the financial guys get up and blow smoke. And it's not because they're sociopaths, right? So there must be something about the endemic system that is saying, this is the way you have to survive in this room right now. So I wanted to know what those were. I'm tired of hearing it's the culture. I want to understand what would predict, if we wanted to have more honest, whole organizations, what would predict whether or not causes people to withhold or distort the truth. And we found 4 factors. Okay. One of them was strategic clarity.
It seems like some of that is, but I guess I want to make sure I understand the point or the premise of this. So I guess I suspect there's a slight difference between, not telling the truth and not knowing kind of how to tell the truth, in terms of, I've certainly seen organizations that, someone gets up and, presents something, and upon later inspection, it's clear that people at the meeting had serious objections or questions, but either were, I think at some level, didn't have the tools or the ability or the frame or the process to even counter them, versus, they knew what to say, they knew how to counter them, but they chose not to take action. Do you see a difference between that situation?
Absolutely not. The fact that I can explain it with your lack of skill doesn't excuse it. Yeah. There's lack of skill. We control, in one of the dimensions in our statistical modeling, we control for psychological safety, whether or not it was improving or declining. Yeah. So there are lots of reasons why people don't do it.
Okay, got it.
And typically they tell themselves, the internal narrative is, it's either a waste of my time or it's not safe to do so. There'll be retribution. And so interesting, when you ask people, well, gosh, if you're so afraid, tell me who's been fired before. Tell me who's got their butt reamed when they tell the truth. There are no examples, right? Got it. So the internally self-imposed narrative of it's just not safe for me to do so is just crap. Yeah. I'm so tired of hearing senior leaders. If you're at that table, it's your job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's the point that I think most leaders get, is that it's almost a fiduciary responsibility. If you're going to take this job and you're going to represent the company, that's what you do. That's your role.
And it doesn't matter if you're leaders, Attila, if it's 10, it doesn't matter what the reasoning is. If you have a point of view that could spare your organization heartache in the future, then you're obligated to bring it up. It doesn't matter what flack you get back. It doesn't matter how skilled or unskilled or comfortable or uncomfortable you are doing it. Those are all interesting but not relevant if you're at that table. Yeah. When I have people ask me all the time, because it's my job. My clients rely on me to tell them the unvarnished, difficult to hear, compassionate and blunt truth about their organization. And people ask me, how do you find the courage to do it? And for me, this is not an issue of courage. It shouldn't require courage to be truthful. It should require compassion. I said, my biggest fear is not telling my leader that they're naked. My biggest fear is a leader coming back to me 3 months later when they're in a ditch saying, you knew I was naked.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't say anything. Yeah. Yeah.
That terrifies me far more than whatever flack I might get back by having to hold up a mirror they don't want to look in. Because at the end of the day, I can help them avoid a catastrophe, but to know that I could have prevented a catastrophe and didn't, that's immoral.
So what are some of the other factors? So you mentioned the study looked at four. I think you mentioned four different factors. What were some of the other ones?
Yes. So accountability. When your accountability systems are perceived to be unfair or unjust, or the way they measure contribution, and I don't mean compensation, I mean just measurement of contribution as unfair, people lie to embellish their accomplishments and hide their mistakes. And when that's the case, you're 3.5 more times more likely to have people lie out, withhold the truth. Governance structures. So when there's no place for the truth to be told, when there are no convenings of leaders where difficult, complex choices and difficult decisions can't be made, it goes underground. Mm-hmm. You're 4 times more likely to have people lie, withhold the truth. And the last, surprisingly, was cross-border wars, right? So when you have cross-departmental rivalry, when you
fiefdoms,
you are fiefdoms and silos, you're 6 times more likely to have people withhold or assert the truth. Because now we have dueling truths. And when we have dueling truths, mine will prevail. Yeah. And so all up, it's cumulative. So all up, all in, if those 4 things are true about you, you are 16 times more likely to find yourself on the cover of the Wall Street Journal or New York Times in a story you never wanted to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does one kind of sort through those potential scenarios and then tackle them in terms of actually making changes to the organization? I mean, is there a clear process that one can take to go through this?
So the first thing is so let's go back to the first one. If you lack strategic clarity, be honest about it, right? If you have words that don't match your actions, if you have a mission statement or a value statement that people are not saying you're living by, align them. Yeah. Make sure, and don't just announce your strategy. Embed it. Make sure every single person in your organization has a clear line of sight between what they do and who you say you are. Mm-hmm. To yourselves and your marketplace, and make sure their own sense of purpose. This was the other fascinating thing in the study we found was we've heard forever, 70% of the workforce is disengaged, 50% have no sense of purpose, and we're buying foosball tables and free lunches to try and fix it. Yeah. The reality is people's sense of meaning gets covered up when they feel duplicitous. When they feel like they're behaving in ways that contradict who they are, they hide. So simply create a clear line of sight between the meaning they want to derive from them, the reason they're on the planet, and the work they do, and you'll have everybody engaged. Mm-hmm. Secondly, design your governance structure. Make sure you distribute decision rights according to your strategy so that the right leaders are around the right tables with the right authority and resources to execute. Don't have everything rolled over top. Don't have all pathways lead to a CEO. Don't leave everything so confused that everybody's playing the game show, whose decision is it anyway. We all walk out of the meeting going, look at this. Is that your decision? Who? Yeah. And of course that's convenient because then everybody gets to say it was mine. I get to do what I want. If you have accountability structures where nobody's giving feedback on their performance, nobody understands what they're being held accountable to. It feels like it's the metric du jour, and it's a rotating effort of what yardstick's being used to beat me up today.
Yeah.
Fix it. And lastly, if you have rivalries at the seams, force those functions to find a way to understand their co-created value, right? If you have competing metrics where sales believes one thing and marketing believes another, and they're in their natural different timelines, and you're allowing that rivalry to split what the customer experience is, fix it, right? There's something at the intersection of marketing and sales that gets created that's valuable to your marketplace that neither of those could do themselves. Yeah. Take those functions, figure out what that is, and create it and measure them against it. Don't allow the fungus of dysfunction to grow in the seams between functions, especially if it's something competitive. It's really something you're betting your mission on or betting your strategy on, and it's a capability those functions have to create. Don't leave it to chance, which is so often what our organization designs do. They assume that we'll group everything around functional capability, and we'll assume that the higher order things like innovation at the intersection of marketing, R&D, and customer insights will just take care of itself.
Yeah. Can you drive accountability? I mean, how do you create accountability across those different fiefdoms? I mean, is this about putting people in charge of that? Is it putting metrics that align people above and beyond their functional silos?
Well, so it's a couple of things. First of all, if you're organized around functions versus customers or processes or regions, geographically, you have to recognize that those seams are a thing, right? So if innovation is a capability, let's use that as an example, at the intersection of R&D, marketing, and customer insights, those 3 things are a separate thing apart from the homerooms they emanate from. So if innovation is the work that those 3 things contribute to, how does that work come together? How is it linked? Is it a governing process? Is it a product development process? Is it a set of metrics? It's probably a variety of things. But if that seam isn't designed to integrate those three contributions into innovation, it's not going to happen, right? Because when those people show up at that table, I'm just the ambassador from marketing, or I'm just the ambassador from customer insights. I'm not here to innovate. But if you tell them together you're accountable for innovation, and we'll measure you that way, and we'll reward you that way, and we'll hold you accountable for that, and you create the organizational mechanisms that allow them to innovate, now you've designed the scene to be something other than the sum total of the parts.
So what's an example of a metric or of a process that would hold, say those three organizations accountable for something like innovation?
So, and I've got an article on HBR called How to Permanently Resolve Cross-Departmental Rivalries, and it outlines our process, our toolkit for how we do seam design. But we call it a seam startup. Okay. The first thing you have to do is understand what the value is, right? So at the intersection of whether it's logistics and supply chain, could be cost, or and finance. At customer experience, could be at the intersection of customer success, sales, marketing, and product development. But whatever the muscle is, understand what that value is and what is the value that they create together. Make them define it. Then the question becomes, what are you going to measure it against, right? So what are the KPIs? What are the capabilities you have to be good at to deliver against that? And what metrics will you all share? And that's really the key thing, is share, right? So one of us can't outperform the other, right? To these metrics, we're all held accountable. And if there are contradictions, so for example, if marketing and R&D and product development are in innovation world are held accountable for a metric that somehow conflicts with an individual marketing goal, fix it. Don't allow that contradiction to exist.
So you push it. So you make them responsible for resolving the contradictions.
You bring them together to do that work. You don't hand the answer. You ask them how will conflicts be resolved? How will decisions get made? Who owns what decision rights about what part of the process? How will you maintain trust? And what are your service level agreements? So to each other, you owe things, right? To one another, completely. What are those service level agreements, and how will you agree with that? And then you sign them in blood. Well,
I like this idea that it really is like the senior folks, or the person above all that is really, kind of the facilitator or the coach of the folks that are at the table trying to work these things out, rather than the adjudicator or the person that's solving it for them. It's the person that helping them reach a solution that works for everyone and that's aligned with strategy.
Well, and I think, if you assume, if you've chosen, and I think many mid-caps, in their $50 million to $200 million range are largely geographically landlocked, so mostly they're functional designs. Yeah. They might be also have a matrix of customer segments sizes if you've begun to segment different customers at that point in your maturity. But largely, there are seams not being managed, right? There are intersections of organizations and people's ability to work to cross borders and work cross-functionally that are not working well, and they don't know what to do. And so they bring in the team builders to do collaboration work. I can't tell you the number of times I get called to do workshops on collaboration for people who could collaborate just fine. There isn't anything about the organization that would tell them to do that. So we treat it as if it's in a personal conflict, or it's some kind of a competitive thing, or it's a personality set of quirks, when in reality is the organization is encouraging them to be at odds with each other. Yeah,
they've set them up. By design, they've set them up for conflict.
Set up. Yeah. And so unless you solve at that level, you're just going to keep putting all wallpaper over all wallpaper and frustrate them. But most organizations don't understand that seams are things. They're not just the result of two functions being adjacent. And if you're not going to manage those seams as if they have value, that's where all of our competitive value is delivered. It's at intersections. No one function or one group in any organization holds all the competitive value. Yeah. And so if you don't understand where that first of all, go back to the strategy issue. If you haven't defined what that competitive value is, and you've seen it before, Bruce, many haven't, then it really doesn't matter what's at your seams, because it's all going to be fungus growing in the cracks.
Yeah. Well, you're never going to successfully resolve your seams without a set of strategic priorities and a strategic plan. So,
and I think all things emanate back. So if you haven't done that work, don't look at the symptoms of a dysfunction you're seeing downstream with leaders being neurotic and organizations being dysfunctional. That's way downstream from the root cause of the fact that nobody knows who you really are.
Yeah. So let's circle back to that. So strategy. So I guess what is the either process or the components that need to kind of be in place for a company to develop a successful strategy? How do you approach that process inside, particularly these kind of mid-market companies that are, typically struggling with this question of what really is our strategy?
So we have a process called strategy mapping. And everybody has different language to this. Some people call it your business model. Some people call it your strategic imperatives. There's way too much jargon about it. But at the end of the day, I don't really care about your mission or vision statement. Those are interesting, but they don't do anything for me. I want to know, what are the 3 or 4 things that differentiate you, that you will be known for, that I can look at your budget and see the investments in, the work that you will do that you know for sure that gets you put $1 in, $5 comes in the door. And then I want to know, what are the capabilities that support those differentiators? What do you have to be really good at organizationally to do that? Yeah. And it starts by a very simple look at all the work you do. Most leaders try and create this false sense of egalitarianism in their culture that we're all created equal, and they don't realize that that's a dangerous thing to do, right? We divide up work in 3 categories: competitive enabling, and necessary. Competitive work that's the work you do. That's your secret sauce. It doesn't matter who's doing it. It's just that it's work that gets done that sets you apart from competitors. It is the magic. Yeah. That's about 15 to 20% of the work that's done across your organization. There's another category we call competitive enabling. It's the work that directly supports that work. It's another 15 to 20% of the work. And then about 50 to 60% of your work you do is necessary. It keeps the lights on, keeps you out of jail. You don't have to do it better than anybody else. You maximize that for maximum efficiency. But your competitive enabling work, you maximize for optimal impact and effectiveness. Your best talent, all your resources that get disproportionately invested there. And that's what makes you good. And you have to keep that work separated. But too often you walk around organizations, you see people who are mixing half their day doing necessary work and half their day doing competitive work, trying to, which of course never gets done because the urgency of the necessary work always prevails over the more complex work of competitive work. And so you mix all that stuff together and you dilute the entire ability of your organization to compete. Yeah. So you first have to sort it out and identify it, separate it, identify what makes you distinct and what you have to be good at. And then from there, begin your organizational work to build on. And that includes the seams.
Suggesting that the actual resource allocation, the organizational design, resource allocation roles are specifically mapped to one of these 3 categories. And you don't want to have a role that is trying to do more than one.
Right. Well, and in some cases, that's ideal. In some cases, of course, there are going to be some teams or groups who some portion of their day has a little bit of each. Yeah. Okay. But the reality is you have to know that. So when people are making trade-offs, when they have discretionary time, they have 10 hours in a day or 8-9 hours in a day to do their work. You have to help them understand when you have to trade off, always err on the side of doing the competitive work.
Yeah. It's interesting because that was going to be my follow-up is I think one of the challenges is particularly, when you're early in that growth process, you don't have the resource capacity to have fully dedicated people to some of these areas. So you're going to have folks that do have, allocations to the different areas. But I think I haven't quite thought about it this way. Well, one of the exercises I typically do with teams is we do their plan, we do their week. What does your week look like? And we design the ideal week. And it's really about time boxing and finding and protecting what I call a defensible calendar, your dedication to these areas. And when you've time boxed, to something, the strategy is like, hell or high water, you're going to spend that time on strategy. And, and that's typically where these groups fall down is that they keep saying, okay, yeah, this week I'm going to do 5 hours of strategy. And, it's Friday at 4:00 and they haven't done an hour yet.
Right. And most of them don't even know what that means anyway. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So should I read it? Should sit back and put my feet up on the desk and think big thoughts? Should I read a couple of articles? Should I check our financials? They don't even know what doing that work means because first and foremost, at the top of the house, you can't do it alone, right? Strategy is not a solo act. Yeah. And so, the work that it takes to actually to work on your organization and not in it and keep things competitive, to keep things aligned, to keep, if you're talking about things that are going to happen next week, you're not being strategic, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I tell executive teams, at some point, your goal needs to be that you're not talking about anything in your organization when you're together that's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months. If you are, you're now an operations team. That's great. Someone should do that work, but you're not the executive team. You're not minding the future. Yeah. But so often the tyranny of the urgent draws them down into the organization, down into details they don't want to be in, down into levels of micromanagement, where they're creating all kinds of decision compression. Right, where you think about 3 intersecting pipes of an organization: a strategic system, a coordinating system, and an operating system. Your operating system is all your frontline folks getting stuff done. Your coordinating system is typically your middle organization who have to do all the lateral coordination across departments. And your strategic system is supposed to be minding the future, right? Yeah. But when you elevate up through those systems as your career grows, and you take all that work with you, which many of them do, and don't let it go, you create this compression where the pipe is getting squished in the middle, and then you have the classic, information goes up, decisions come down. Yeah. Reality where you've slowed the organization down, you've created everybody's worst nightmare as you've gone from startup to grow up, you've created the bureaucracy they all feared. Mm-hmm. You haven't designed for optimal performance. And it is such a classic journey of slow death for organizations as they get to that place of, $100 million, $200 million. And then the leaders get tired. And so they decide, let's just sell the company.
Yeah, no, it's a drain. It's a drain and it's a slog. So I think I was reading some of your work earlier, and I think another concept that came up in there that I thought was really interesting and important when you look at strategic work is the need to focus external. And I think a lot of teams end up getting so sort of internally focused and navel gazing around what their business is doing. How do you help or how does a team, maintain or develop a focus for external when it comes to developing strategies?
It's funny. I just met with a client over the weekend. He took on the president job. It's a retail company. Mm-hmm. It's a great company. They're doing great work, and they have a very particular unique customer niche that they serve. And he was all excited about everything he was telling me and what they're up to and the exciting growth plans and great things on the horizon. Mm-hmm. And not once did he mention their target customer. And I said, happens to be female. Yeah. And I said, who is she and where is her voice? Get out there in your stores. Yeah. Get out there watch her, listen to her, talk to her. Where is her voice? How is her voice shaping your decision making? And it's astounding to me how many people the voice of the customer it's a data set, it's an insight, it's some analytic aggregate. But it's not a real person. And if you are not out there shopping your competitors, listening to your customers where your customers and your people interact, mm-hmm. on the phone, listening into customer service calls, or in your channels, or in your warehouses, or watching how people are metabolizing what you do, your service or your product, you are forfeiting one of the most richest data sets that you could ever have to inform your choices. If you don't know what your competitor moves are, if you don't know at the point of decision what one of your customers or consumers is doing when they choose between you or somebody else, it is so common, I'm sure you've seen it too, Bruce, where the thing you think you're selling is not what your customer's buying.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You may be selling an interesting solution. They're buying a cool version of a cheap product. Yeah. Or vice versa. And so absent that information, you're going to scale on a lie. You're going to grow yourself on top of a false truth or a partial truth that eventually will topple you. Yeah. No, at some point, you're going to make a poor decision, right? Because you're going to be basing that decision on a set of assumptions or an understanding or a frame that is just not really correct and not really in line with what the market is. It's completely flawed. Yeah. And the dangerous thing is, if you've done something really, really right, that flaw can go on for a long time. Yeah. Well, it's a false sense of security. and you think the market's rewarding you. Yeah. You think that top revenue growth and typically at that point it's your sales force defining the strategy. Whatever they're selling, that's the strategy. Yeah. And you can go years on that partial truth or that falsehood before you hit a headwind or you hit a ditch and you realize, oh crap. Yeah. We took the wrong exit about 80 miles ago, mm-hmm. and I've been driving on the wrong road for 2 years, and we have no idea where we went wrong. Yeah, totally lost. No idea how to recover. Unfortunately, I think we've both seen it several times, and I think that whole kind of muscle around how to think strategically, how to bring in strategic insights, understanding competition, understanding core customer, and really being decisive about that stuff. It's hard. I get it. It's not easy, but it is the element of what a leadership team is really doing in terms of guiding the company. You're absolutely right. It's really, really hard work, but you know what? It's also your job. So learn to do it, right? Yeah. So it's our when we do our Rising to Power, that research on executives assuming higher altitudes. We've known for 20 years that more than half of them fail in the first 18 months. That was the reason we wrote the book, because we wanted to understand, why are they so ill-prepared? How could they be labeled as high potential rock stars in the middle and suddenly become a disaster at the top within a year? And we wanted to find out what that was. And so often so many in our research said they were not prepared for the challenges of the highest altitudes of their organizations. And so the answer is get them ready in the middle. Start preparing people for broader responsibilities in the middle, so that when you need to push them up, they're prepared. They don't bring the middle with them and then bring the top down. Yeah. But it's astounding if you wait till your first assignment as vice president to begin your preparation to be a vice president, you're probably not going to do too well. Yeah, you're 6 months too late at a minimum. Yeah. Well, Ron, this has been a pleasure. We're going to hit time here. I'm sure there's probably 3 or 4 episodes that we could do on these topics. If people want to get more information about you, about Navalent, about Rising to Power, what's the best way to get more information? Yeah, so if you want to keep chatting, come visit. We're at Navalent, Navalent.com. We have great videos and white papers and articles, and our books are all there. So come. We have a great blog. We have a free quarterly magazine you can sign up for that has content information about all these issues. We have a free ebook on leading transformation. So our playbook on Within, Between, Among is available at Navalent.com/transformation. If you want to check that out, or if you're in the middle of guiding transformation, you can use it as your sort of companion accompaniment. I'm also on Twitter at Ron Carucci, and I'm also on LinkedIn, so please keep in touch.
Perfect, Ron. I'll make sure that all of those links and handles are in the show notes so people can get through and reach you. Thank you again for taking the time. This has been a pleasure. I've learned a lot. Great discussion.
Bruce, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Scaling Up Services with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at scalingupservices.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at scalingupservices.com/newsletter.